Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter Energy Report online at SchachterEnergyReport.ca. He's speaking to us from Calgary. Welcome back to the show, Josef, and Happy New Year.
And same to you. Happy New Year to you, all your listeners. And we had an interesting year in 21. I think it'll probably be at least as interesting in 2022 because we have elections as well as the normal market stuff. So in the U.S. So I think it's going to be an interesting year, and hopefully it's a healthier one than 21 was.
Yes, politically, the first thing Joe Biden did after he was elected was cancel the XL pipeline. And then weeks later, he was begging OPEC to produce more oil and for China to produce more oil because American gasoline prices were skyrocketing. How's that for a political policy backfiring?
Yeah, and then, of course, China can't produce more. It only produces 14, and it consumes 14, so it imports 10. It's the biggest importer in the world, especially from Russia and from OPEC. But they're now importing more from Venezuela, more from Iran. Iran's selling oil $4 a barrel below Brent to get the market to China, and they're selling diluent to Venezuela now. And then Venezuela is selling oil even cheaper to China. So China's taking advantage of these bargain areas where there's sanctions and where there's very few buyers because of the U.S. government sanctions. And again, we'll see what happens if there's an invasion of Ukraine. And will that stop Russian oil exports into Northern Europe? And Europe, and also maybe U.S. is imported every once in a while from Russia. Will they halt shipments and stop sales to the U.S. East Coast, which have been buyers of Russian crude in the past?
Now, how real do you think the invasion of Ukraine is by the Russians? They've got up to 100,000 troops massed on the border.
Scary. I think it's a 50-50 shot that in January, when the ground gets heavy enough for tank warfare, and remember the biggest battle of tank warfare in history was at Kursk, which is just in the area where the Russians are gathering all their forces, and so they're used to winter fighting, and they want the control of eastern Ukraine, where most of the Russian speakers are and Russian citizens are. And a lot of it was the industrial heartland that was built by Russia. And so they want a land corridor to Crimea, which means they have to take over the whole Sea of Azov, or Azov, or how do you pronounce it? And I think that it's more than it's more likely it'll happen. So I put the odds at January 50-50, and the conversation that he's having with between Putin and Biden today is just to see if they'll get concessions where NATO will not move missiles into Ukraine, because if they do, if you take eastern Ukraine, it's only 250 miles from Moscow, and I think just like the Americans during the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't want missiles in Cuba to be aimed towards the United States, I think Russia also says, we don't want NATO forces on our border, able to attack that quickly. So, they have had a history of being invaded from, France and Germany and in the past. And I think, they have a reticence to see NATO controlling Ukraine and bringing military, equipment there. So I think it's likely we may see something. And the kind of reports I've been reading is that Russia will take the eastern part of Ukraine, which up to the Dnieper River, and that would give them the land corridor all the way down so that they could bring, easy by rail or by truck into the Crimea. And one more thing is Ukraine cut off water supplies to Crimea instead of selling it to them. They get Russian natural gas and they pay for it. Well, they cut off water to Crimea, and fresh water was needed, so the Russians have had to find a way around it. Well, grabbing all that land and grabbing all those rivers with fresh water solves their problem. So I think Ukraine added to their own problem by not allowing freshwater sales to the Crimean community. So my guess is there's going to be something. He may threaten to go further than the Dnieper River, but the key thing is that I think the likelihood is 50-50 of an invasion in the month of January.
Now, Russia, of course, whenever they get into situations like this, threatens to cut off natural gas shipments to Europe. How's that been working out?
Well, they've met all their financial commitments in terms of contracted commitments, and the battle line now is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Putin announced yesterday has gas and is ready to ship. But the German government, especially with the Green Party part of the new coalition, is not wanting that to come in. And so they've required them to get a corporate entity set up for it, and then get EU backing. Cold weather and $50 MCF prices, and if they bring on the pipeline, prices could go down at $15 or $20 an MCF. Depending upon how cold this winter becomes, I think is going to be a key. But if he does invade Ukraine, then the Nord Stream pipeline does not come on in 2022. For the winter of 21-22, and it'll just be an issue of what happens after the invasion, and what does they spent $11-12 billion building it, Gazprom. So again, is the value of eastern Ukraine worth more to them than the $12 billion of dead money? And the other issue, of course, is that there's pipelines right now that go through Ukraine to Europe, and through Poland as well. If there's a military confrontation in Ukraine, does Russia, does the Europeans say we're not going to buy any gas? Well, then does that mean that they use more coal? So I think they're in a quandary here because, they want to clean the air. The Green Party wants cleaner. They're not planning to go nuclear. The only solution is natural gas. So there's a lot of now, I think it's 20 ships of LNG from the States heading to Europe to help out, and we've seen European natural gas prices come down 20-30% in the last week. Today we're looking at a 30-40 cent decline in U.S. prices because there's more than adequate supplies and production is rising in the States. So, even though there's cold weather, I think I think there's $3.50 for NYMEX for prices, as I just looked a few minutes ago, and we're looking at close to $5 for AECO in Canada, because of the cold weather we're having across the, western Canada, including you guys in BC getting some snow.
Record cold here, -13, when usually this time of year we're +5.
Yeah, well, if you want to come here, -24, wind chill -35, and we've had -40 and 50 across the province of Alberta in the last week. So it's not nice being outside, and when you see the parks and drive by, you don't see a lot of kids doing tobogganing these days.
Now, a friend of the show, Stuart Muir, said Canada really should be ramping up LNG exports as much as it can to both Europe, which we can't because Quebec's against pipelines, and to Asia, which we can, but we lack facilities in BC yet. And each one of those giant ships carries at least $100 million worth of liquefied gas. He said we're turning down the opportunity to make a fortune.
That's correct. Forbes had an article talking about the prices and the profits per ship, were between 35 and 50 million U.S., depending upon if you're selling to Europe at, $40, $50 or selling in, the low 30s to Asia. So it's very, very lucrative. So, of course, the LNG Canada project, 2025 probably is the realistic start date. There have been some issues, with the coastal pipeline. That project, LNG Canada, could be doubled, so instead of 2 BCF a day, maybe 4 BCF a day. There's smaller projects that are being planned as well. And again, once we get these working, then potentially you could have more projects come on. There's a massive shortage. Remember, people were talking about a glut of LNG not 4 or 5 years ago. And now we have massive shortages. So it just shows you how quickly things can change because of economic activity, because of people not wanting to burn coal anymore, because of their environmental commitments, and also because of the whole shortage of capital being spent to replace decline rates from the fields that are producing right now, and a lot more money has to be spent just to replace declines. And we are lucky in Canada having the Montney, and potentially the Montney could grow substantially in the future years if we have export capacity on the West Coast, and more pipelines going south as well.
Stuart Muir also pointing out all these protesters who say they represent the Wet'suwet'en people where the natural gas pipeline to Kitimat will run. They had council elections there, people 80% in favor of the councillors who were pro-pipeline, and they voted out the hereditary chiefs who were against the pipeline because they get great economic benefits from it, jobs, community centers, health centers, and so on.
Yeah, it's a question of the minority rights versus the majority rights, and elections are won with 50 plus 1 votes, or in the case of the U.S. Senate, there's 50 in the tie vote by the Vice President Kamala Harris. So if the majority is wanting these things to go through, those in opposition, if they have critical health, health and environmental things, they should be considered in the project. But once the decision is made and the locals, from the various, First Nations vote in favor of it, then I think it should go on. And if there are these, opposition people who block the roads and cause all these problems, they even arrested some people from the press. Of course, in the end, they let them go, and there were no charges laid. But this is a problem that that Canada has had. During the Second World War, when we needed to build roads all the way up to Alaska, to defend from potential invasion by Japan, we had an Alaska highway pipeline built in no time, and we built almost every, you look at every major construction project from the railroads to, the St. Lawrence Seaway to, all these projects that were needed for the benefit of Canada. You did them with a majority rule and with government support. Now all of a sudden, the question is, does the minority rule the majority? And I think this has gone to excess.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen old forest logging shut down again because of a few protesters. And again, forestry, one of the biggest employers of Aboriginal people in British Columbia. They're shutting down the fish farms too, another First Nations moneymaker.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. All I know is that, is if you want to have reconciliation, you have to allow the First Nations to become economically strong, to be able to have jobs for their people, for their language and for their heritage to be passed on, and to have anyone opposing this for their narrow self-interest, I think is against the greater good, which we've all wanted to see happen. And, things like, the LNG Canada projects, and, the oxymoron is coal gets shipped to, by the United States mines to BC and shipped through, Rupert, the port of Rupert or whatever, and that gets shipped to Asia. And so, while we're harming our own industry here, we're saying hey, but let's pass through everything we can from the American coal industry, even though they're trying to shut the U.S. coal industry down. It's just nuts.
Yeah, you can see huge piles of coal along the harbor in Vancouver, in North Vancouver, and also in Delta at Delta Port, where their major industry is, yes, shipping coal to Asia.
Yeah, and do they complain about that? Do we hear the environmentalists saying boo about that? Come on. It's like the very selective vision on what's going on, and, between coal and natural gas, come on. The world benefits and the total climate benefits by having more natural gas consumed and way less coal. And, look what's going on in China right now. They've shut their economy down, shut the coal plants down, electricity plants, cut down heavy industry, steel plants, because they want clean air for for the Beijing Olympics starting in just over a month. So it's really very, very narrow thinking, and it's frustrating. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and apparently some of those shutdowns again are contributing to the chip shortage, which is slowing down car shipments.
Yeah, and I think that it's likely that we're going to see this whole issue of the supply chain continuing through 2022. We may see some chips that are easy to manufacture in Korea and Taiwan. They might be easier to produce, and but the high end chips needed for the latest phones, 5G products, those are going to be the ones I think where there's going to be more delays. And I think 2022 is going to be a tougher year. Take into account a couple of things. One, the U.S. has an election year, which means politics is going to be intransigent. There's going to be two opposing groups, and nobody wants to go to the middle to do deals. Second, you've got the taper finish sometime in mid-March, which removes $120 billion a month of liquidity, which is 1.44 trillion annually, and that's 6% of GDP. So you're removing 6% of monetary heroin. And then you add in the third, where the Fed is talking about raising interest rates starting March, April. So you've got the quantity of money being removed, and you've got the price of money going up. Everybody says the Fed is your friend, or the Fed is not your friend. Well, tell me, I think the Fed's not your friend, which means that tightening economic conditions are likely in 2022. The job data has been terrible. We'll get another job report next Friday. We'll see where that, what comes on with that. And if the job data, again, is below expectation. And the other thing we're seeing is a lot of announcements of increased wage rates. And the big problem in the late 1970s was not the inflation from food and energy. It was the long-term structural impact of inflation from labor costs going up, which were embedded, and that made it very, very tight. You can always see oil and gas prices go up and down. Food prices can go up and down because more supply comes on. But once you've embedded higher wages, how many people are going to give the wage increase back to the employer?
We'll have more with Josef Schachter right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Josef Schachter. Josef, is enough money being put into oil and gas exploration to keep gasoline prices low?
Well, I think that we're sitting here with in Canada, where we are a big producer and exporter of, so the prices are there because of the world markets, and we're in winter, very cold weather in Europe, very cold weather here. So the price of oil is in the $76.50 range. And, January, February are usually the coldest months, and that's when you have the big drawdowns for natural gas. So I think prices stay elevated the next 2 months. But then once you get to March, with U.S. production rose another 200,000 barrels to a record high for this year, 11.8 million barrels a day, and that's up from 11 million a year ago from the EIA data that came out on Wednesday. So we've got more production coming on in the U.S. We get less demand starting March, April when you go into the shoulder season. And if OPEC continues their, strategic increases where, they say they're going to bring on 400,000 barrels a day on OPEC Plus, but the last number, I think they did only 285,000 in November. But if January 4th, they're having their next OPEC meeting for the February allocation, and most people think that'll be the posted official number of 400,000. But even if the number they increase is 200,000 to 300,000, EIA, the Energy Information Administration of the U.S., and the International Energy Agency, the IEA of Europe, all are saying that starting after Q1, after winter, there will be builds in inventory around the world in Q2, Q3, and Q4, and builds in inventory mean usually lower prices. So my expectation is that depending upon how weak the U.S. economy is and how weak the China economy is, that we could see prices go down below $60. And if the economic conditions are very weak and the bitterness and bilateral problems in the States with the election are nasty, then it's possible we could see very weak economies as the intransigence between the two sides gets nastier and nastier. And then job prospects, and again, Omicron and variants of COVID-19 can also be a big issue here, as we're seeing the commentary that once you get through the Christmas and New Year's holiday, Europe is going to tighten up again. All of these put together, I think, mean in Q2, Q3 of 2022, we could be looking at recessionary conditions, and that, I think, would drive prices of crude oil below 60. So we have a target of 48 to 54 as our low end of our range, and low 50s as our likely bottom of the range. So $20 to $25 less than we are today is quite likely in Q2, Q3 of 2022.
Joseph, thank you so much for chatting with us, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And if any of your listeners want to keep up with our macro view, they can go to our webpage, SchachterEnergyReport.ca. We have our subscriber product, which relates to the companies, but we have a free product which covers our macro, which is the Eye on Energy report, and that's a free product. So if they're interested in keeping up with the overview, macro view that we have, that's an easy way for them to do it, and the price is right, free.
My guest has been Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter Energy Report, as he mentioned, online at SchachterEnergyReport.ca. He was speaking to us from my hometown of Calgary, Alberta. If you have any questions for Joseph or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com, and we'll ask that question for you. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.